Well, thank you, Jamie. Here's what I need you to do. I need two things from you this morning. One is I just need you to turn to the person on your right or left and just give them a big smile because it may be the only one they get today. So if you would, just smile at somebody. Let them know that you're with them. Now, don't you feel better, right? All right. So here's what else I need you to do. I need you to stand up. I need everybody to stand up, but then I need you, if you have served in our armed forces in any way, shape, or form, or currently served or currently serving in some way, would you sit back down, if you would? And could the rest of us just thank them for what they've done? You know, it's a powerful thing. It's a powerful thing to honor someone. You guys may be seated, and sometimes we don't do that enough. But today is a very special day for that. And I know this. I want to say thank you and for what you've done. And one of our friends, family friends, sent us a photo of their son as he's transferring this idea of being grateful for other people. He sent us this picture of his son putting a flag out on yesterday, and it's pretty impressive little flag. I knew you guys would do that. Oh, right. It's pretty good importance to say people are worth it. Even those who have gone before us, those who have sacrificed for us, it's really important. Those who give their life so that we might have this kind of life, right? That's really important. We're in this series entitled People Are Worth It. And I hope more than anything you're enjoying it. I've enjoyed speaking, and I know Chad did too as well. And it's just been part of a response that we have to you to shape our culture of our church and to kind of shape who you are and to give you some perspective about the things God would ask of us as people of God as we take a look at how we treat people outside the walls of this church and how we treat people inside the walls of this church, and just recognizing that people are worth it. And I know this last week, maybe I probably spent all of my trust with you because you'll never eat brownies from me again. But and no one's ever going to invite me to another movie. I know that. But that's okay, because if it did shape your culture, if it did shape you and how you think about people, it will be worth it to me. I know that. People are worth it, right? We've been defining what it is. And so today we're going to continue on. And I know this in 1879. I want to take your mind back to that day. It was a Monday afternoon in the spring of 1879. It was just off the coast of Nantucket Island, Massachusetts. The United States is just newly formed and not that old. It's only about 100 years old at that point. And a storm began to build on the Atlantic Ocean, and it began to rage on the sea. Eight men got into a little rowboat. And for the next 32 hours until the end of Tuesday night, fought that storm and rescued several hundred people off the coast of Nantucket because of the storm that was crushing the ships that were out there just less than a mile from shore, just less than a mile from land. And because of their heroic efforts, our government gave them all 8 of them, a medal. They all survived. Some of the people that they tried to rescue did not, but they did. And our government gave them medals, and the leader of those 8 men received a gold medal that had this inscription on it: "Persistence to the last measure of need," is what it said on the back of the medal. I need you to think about that. Persistence to the last measure of need. He was being honored for something that he had done to save lives. There's still a little museum on Nantucket Island that's devoted to this volunteer organization. They were volunteers. They were not paid to do that. They were a volunteer organization that had been formed centuries before, and they were dedicated to saving the lives of people, because in those days, travel by sea was very treacherous. And storms, as on that day, storms in the Atlantic would just literally crush the ships as they were coming into the harbor around Boston. And it became known as the graveyard of the Atlantic. And so this group of men, this group of individuals, recognized that many lives would be lost if they did not do something. And so they formed this organization, a life-saving business. They became known as the Surfmen. Also, later they would become known as the Humane Society, which would later be changed toward animals. It's interesting when you think about how these people, this group of volunteers, they built little huts along the coastline of Nantucket Island. huts where if you were out at sea and you were drenched in rain, you could come in and warm yourself by a fire. They would stand and they would watch the sea at all times. Whenever a ship would go down, they would rush out, go out, and people had devoted everything in their life to save lives, no matter what. They didn't put themselves out there for money or for recognition. They just simply knew the value of people. People to them were worth it for them to save them. And to remind them what was at stake, they had this really simple motto. They adopted this motto, and it's still there today. And it just simply says this: you have to go out, but you don't have to come back. You have to go out. In order to save life, you have to go out. Can't stand on the shore. You can't just rely on the hutch. You can't just lie next to the fire. You have to go out. It's possible you might not come back. You have to go. And it's fascinating to me to read all of history and the accounts of people who have literally given and risked their lives to save people that they've never met, to save people that they don't know, to not even by first name. And over time, this little volunteer organization, it changed because the United States Coast Guard began to take the task of rescue. The Coast Guard was formed, one of our military mites. And for a while, the Coast Guard and this life-saving society would work side by side, but eventually these volunteers who are manning these little huts, they stopped searching the coastlines for things and people in danger. And they stopped sending out teams to rescue drowning people. They still exist today. This life-saving organization still exists today. Matter of fact, they still meet quite often. They have meals together. They tell old stories of time gone by. They enjoy one another's company. They're just not in the life-saving business anymore. The Apostle Paul, he's in the life-saving business. He was in the life-saving business. And he knew the value of people. That's what allowed him to say in 1 Corinthians chapter 9, he says, though I am free, I belong to no one. I've made myself a slave to everyone to win as many as possible. To the Jews, I've become like a Jew to win the Jews. To those under the law, I became like one under the law, so as to win one under the law. To those not having the law, I became like one not having the law, though I am not free from God's law, but I'm under Christ's law, so as to win those not under the law. Then he says this, to the weak I became weak. I've become all things to all people, so that by all possible means, think about this, by all possible means I might save some. Followers of Jesus, Christians, we're in the life-saving business. And you know this, that we don't always see it every day, maybe. We don't always see it. But all around us, there's these little mini shipwrecks that people are having with their life. You know, a friend gets chewed out by their boss, a child fails a test. A wife fights with her husband and she becomes more disappointed with her marriage. A coworker makes a foolish financial decision that impacts the entire company. A high school girl doesn't get asked to a prom. Somebody at church gets caught in a lie. Little shipwrecks that wreak havoc. And you know, as followers of Jesus, one of our lifelines, probably our greatest lifeline, are our words. Words become our lifelines. Because every word we speak has literally the power to bring life and vitality back into someone, to give them a little more life to move forward, or our words become a little bit of a drain on people. They begin to destroy them and suck the life out of them. Words can either build up or destroy. Words that can either offer acceptance and love and hope, or our words have the ability to judge and condemn and wound. That's why, listen, that's why the same apostle who wrote that to the church in Corinth wrote this to the church in Rome. He said this in Romans 15, just accept one another. Accept one another. Like every word you speak has incredible power. Just accept them. Acceptance doesn't mean approval. Not of what they do, not of everything that people do. It just simply means that we want what's best for their soul. We're willing as Christians to accept people, to win them, to save them, to get them out of fate's grasp. If you have your Bible, I want you to turn with me to John chapter 8 this morning. If you don't have a Bible, you can take the Bible in the pew in front of you home. John chapter 8 is where we're going to be. And in John chapter 8, the first few verses of John chapter 8 is a story of a woman who's about to go under. It's also a story about a group of men who used to be or supposed to be, who are supposed to be in the life-saving business, but somehow they've forgotten that they were. And then it's a story of one who's in this story who's searching for what he treasures most, and that is people. Now, I need to tell you a little bit about this woman. This woman had been a young bride. She had dreams about a married life, being a husband, having a husband who loved her, and having an incredible marriage, and praying and worshiping with her husband in the synagogue, and having children and raising a family, but somehow things didn't turn out the way she had planned. And she was disappointed in her marriage, maybe because it was her husband's fault, maybe it was her fault. More than likely, it was both of their faults. And somewhere along the line, this woman in John chapter 8 meets another man. And he notices her, and he actually sits and listens to the things that she has to say. You know this, that acceptance is powerful when your heart aches. You know that. Acceptance is powerful when your heart aches. And this woman in John's story, she meets this man who seems to care all about her, and it was quite innocent at first. Then one day, you know what happens, she crossed a line. Maybe it was a touch that lingered a little too long. Maybe it was a shared look that implied something more between the two of them. Maybe it was the fact that they shared some private thoughts between each other. But one day she crosses a line. And maybe she didn't even think about it at the time, but you know that our enemy, Satan, he loves to get you to not think about the choices that you make. He loves to keep you in the dark. He loves to make your mind fuzzy and hazy so that you can't really see what kinds of choices you're making. But she chose. She chose that day. She started crossing other lines until this all of a sudden becomes a full-blown affair between a man and a wife. And she was living in two different worlds. And while she was in one world, she was able to forget about the other world. She could pretend that the other world didn't exist, and when she was in one world, it kept her from thinking about her children, and it kept her thinking about her integrity and about her soul and where she's going to spend eternity. If you don't know this, let me tell you, if you leave sin to itself, it always envelops and develops more sin in your life. If you just leave it to itself, if you don't deal with it. And she used to probably be a truthful person, because the first time she lied to her husband about where she was going just to meet this man, her heart was pounding. You know that feeling? Her face was blushing, and she was pretty sure that her husband could read her face and every line on her face that she wasn't telling the truth, and she was pretty sure he could tell. Now, though, over time, she became an expert at deceiving her husband. Matter of fact, when she would go, the first time she went to the synagogue after sleeping with this man, she was pretty sure everybody in the room knew. She was pretty sure that God even knew. She thought that maybe God would strike her dead with a lightning bolt. She knew, though, that no one had found out. God didn't strike her dead that time in the synagogue. God did nothing to her. Then comes this day, John chapter 8. Then comes this night, John chapter 8. The door to her home flies open. It's just pushed open. And there would have been men outside who were waiting for her and watching her. And they come rushing into her room and they grab her and they seize her, and she screams and she cries and she begs for mercy, and she would have done anything to go back to that one moment when she crossed that line. But she can't. You know this. You could never go back. That's why in our minds we think that our past is greater than our present or our future. Because we think that whatever's in our past can't ever be dealt with. We can't ever go back. We can't ever be set free from that. The past seems greater to us than our present and future. And she wants to hide, but there's no place to hide. And just like Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, she felt naked and ashamed. And she suddenly realizes she's chosen this life. And just like the paralyzed man in Mark chapter 2, she's taken to Jesus by a group of men while Jesus is going to be teaching a crowd. Only she's not carried on a mat. She's carried in a sheet. She's covered in a sheet. The men who bring her are not her friends. They're her enemies. She's brought to Jesus not to be healed, but to be killed. And Jesus had just sat down to teach the people. And these men are more than willing to humiliate this woman so that they could get to Jesus. Because it's Jesus that they're after. The text tells us that they were looking for something for which they could accuse Jesus of. So their task is to catch Jesus, and so they use this woman to put Jesus on the spot, to gather material so that someday they could put Jesus on a cross. You think about it this way. Sometimes in our own lives, the tasks that we have become greater than the people around us. Anybody guilty? Where some things that we want to see happen, we override whatever people are near us. And so in chapter 8, verse 4, it says this. They say this to him, teacher, like they're trying to honor him, because he's seated. Teacher, this woman was caught in the act. You know this. The law of Moses was quite clear about what would happen to those who were caught in the act. Like, you couldn't just have circumstantial evidence. It couldn't just be hearsay. Matter of fact, you couldn't just have one person who knew about this. You had to have 2 or 3 witnesses according to the Mosaic law. Think about what that means. That means this, that for some amount of time, 2 or more or 3 or more of these men had been waiting and watching, hanging around this woman's house. They kept looking through her window. We're not told how long they watched. We just know that they did. We're not told what they saw. Their spying, though, does tell us how much contempt they have for this woman and how much contempt they have for Jesus. But the law is very clear. The law simply says, stone her. What do you say, Jesus? The law is clear. What do you say? They think to themselves, we've got Jesus now. We've got him trapped. Because if he says, let her go, then he's soft on the law. If he says, go ahead and stone her, all of the people who are sitting there listening to Jesus would get upset at him because he's been preaching mercy and compassion and loving people. And here's this woman. She's standing there trembling in fear with guilt, wishing that she could die and knowing that she probably will. And all of those who are accusing her are saying, we've got Jesus now. And they stand there. And they stand there with stones in their hands. Just waiting for the word from Jesus. Just say the word, Jesus, and I'll let it fly. Just say the word. Let me ask you a question this morning. You guys ever held a stone in your hand? I know you have, because in your mind, this is how you think. There are certain sins that are greater than certain sins. Right? Like in your mind, you've categorized certain sins are greater than certain sins. And And what causes us to pick up a stone is based on the way that you and I categorize sins in our minds. And for most of us, we have them divided into two categories. And it's not lesser sins and greater sins, or it's not sins that are good and some are bad. It's literally this, that there are some sins that we would say are sins of the flesh, sins that are external, sins that are visible, sins that are out there in the open that everybody can see, everybody in the room knows what's going on. And they generally involve an appetite that gets out of control. Sins like lust and greed and drunkenness and laziness. They're the sins that get exposed to the world. And they can literally turn almost anything into an idol, like pornography or Krispy Kreme donuts or certain automobiles or the remote control on your TV. They're the sins that get you noticed. And we react to the sins that are on the outside because we raise our eyebrows and we cross our arms when we see them. They're the sins that tend to lead to other sins like deceit and betrayal and despair. But there's another category of sins that exists. They're not so visible. They're more sins of our soul. They're on the inside. They have names like pride and arrogance and self-righteousness and just being judgmental of other people. And they don't provoke as much gossip, maybe because gossip is one of them. And listen, we rarely discipline those sins. Very rarely do you discipline somebody because they have too much pride. But we're most shocked and outraged by the first group, the ones that are on the outside. But you know something? Jesus most often, addresses the second. And pride and arrogance make it possible for you to love God and despise people. It just does. And we have no idea that those less visible sins are literally crippling us from being able to love people. Because we walk through life with with a stone in our hands, with judgmental thoughts and superior attitudes and impatient words and bitter resentments, and we have little room left in our life for loving people. And all around us are people who are trembling and broken. And they have guilt, and they're fearful, and they're lost, and they're literally drowning in sin. And if we're not careful, our own self-righteousness, we don't even see them because we're so consumed with ourselves. Or maybe worse yet, we might see them, but we're not moved to do anything about it. We don't take notice because we're not in the life-saving business anymore. The professionals will take care of it. Listen, I've been in church my whole life. My whole life. My dad was preaching on a stage when I was born. And I just know this. I love the church. But I have to wonder sometimes, why is it that churches produce so many stone throwers? I've seen far too many followers of Jesus who just love to pass judgment on people. Somebody's kids are a little wild, we pick up a stone. Somebody's marriage isn't quite going the way we think it should go, we pick up another stone. The worship guy sings a song a little differently and maybe the drums are a little too loud. We love to throw stones. Somebody crosses a line, somebody violates a code, somebody has a problem and word begins to spread and people begin to pick up stones. And the truth is, even though we would never admit it, I think we get energized by gathering stones. And a lot of times, it's never done openly. I just know this, that we tend to think the words that we don't speak. John Ortberg says those stones are the ones that are highly polished. They kill all the same. Philip Yancey tells a story about a prostitute. He's an author, and he wrote a book on grace, God's grace. And he tells a story about a prostitute who came to him one day, and he said that she was just a wretched sight. She was homeless and sick and unable to buy food for her 2-year-old daughter. And she started crying and sobbing in his arms, and he said she told me that she had been renting out her 2-year-old daughter, 2 years old, to men who loved kinky sex. She made more renting out her daughter than she could make in an hour, that she could make all night. She had to do it, she said. That was the only way she could satisfy her drug habit and feed her daughter. So he said these words to her. He said, after a long conversation and her crying her to the point of despair, he said, have you ever just gone to the church for help? And he said, I'll never forget the look of despair and shock on her face. And she says, the church? Why would I go to the church? I already feel bad about myself. They would just make me feel worse. You ever wonder why in biblical times women like this flock to Jesus, but in modern times they run from the followers of Jesus? Like, what if Valley View, what if us as Christians were to never pick up a stone? What if we could do what Paul, or what the Hebrew writer says in Hebrews chapter 12, see to it that no one misses out on the grace of God. So there they stand. This woman who's waiting to die, a bunch of men holding a stone, and then there's Jesus. And the stone throwers are saying, well, what do you say, Jesus? And Jesus does the most curious thing. He bends down and he begins to write in the sand, probably in red letters, right? This is an amazing event because this is the only time in the Gospels where we know that Jesus was capable of writing. And he didn't write down on a piece of paper or on a piece of papyrus that we could save it so we would know what he says. He writes in the sand so it could easily be erased. Don't miss that. And Jesus' actions at that moment were frustrating to those who were holding the stones. Because Jesus doesn't seem to be paying attention. And so these teachers of the law, they keep pressing him. You're the rabbi. You make the call. What do you say, Jesus? And so Jesus stands to his feet and he speaks. Go ahead. Stone her. Throw it. That's what the law says. But Jesus says, but there's one more rule. You know that. Let the man who has no sin go first. Let the man who has no sin go first. Then Jesus goes back to writing on the ground, which I find really interesting in the book of John. Because what's so interesting about the ground to John? I have an idea. You know, when you're confronted with sin, where do your eyes go? Down. They do. John doesn't tell us what he wrote. John doesn't tell us why he wrote in the ground. We just know that he was doing that, and scholars have argued about what Jesus was writing. We're left to guess. Some believe that he was maybe writing the Ten Commandments. Some believe that because of Roman law, he was writing the sentence out, because that's how Roman judges did that. They write the sentence out and then they'd read it. Way back to the 5th century, they believed that maybe Jesus was just writing the names of every sinner in that circle, the sins of all the leaders in that circle. Something like, maybe you were standing at a window watching adultery happen just a little too long. It may be that Jesus is writing down their sins, but he writes them down in sand so that they could be easily erased. And you know what's hard for us? It's hard for us to imagine a life without condemnation and judgment because of our past. Like, we would love for things to be easily removed, but it's hard for us to imagine a life like that. Whatever he's writing, whatever he's doing, Jesus just draws a line in the sand. And he confronts those men with this decision. You go ahead, you throw your stone. You go ahead, if you want to, you pass judgment on her, you condemn her, you do whatever you think is right. It's your call. But only do it if you're sinless yourself. Because you just need to remember that sinful people, fallen people, are worth it to me. You need to be persistent to the last measure of need when it comes to sinful people. Like then an amazing thing happens. Right? Someone lets go of their stone. And then after a few seconds, someone else drops their stone. And then a third. Probably we know Scripture says it's the older ones first, because they're the wisest ones in the circle. Because the young and the stubborn and the energetic, they would love to take a shot. They would just love to inflict judgment on somebody. But those who have been softened by life's hardship, those who are older, maybe they remember what it's like to stand there in need of forgiveness. Maybe they're the kind of people who embrace thoughts like this, that healing is actually greater than killing somebody. That grace is actually greater than superiority. That a stone on the ground is greater than a stone in the hand. And everyone's thinking, wow, in two categories. Here's the sinners and here's the righteous. But Jesus says, no, it's not that. Here's sinners who deny that they're sinners. And here's sinners who admit that they are sinners. So this morning, I just want to ask you this. You guys have any stones that you need to let go of? Maybe against your mother, maybe against your father, maybe against a spouse or an ex-spouse, maybe a brother or a sister, maybe a boss, a coworker, maybe it's just someone from your past who's really, really hurt you. And you've carried that stone around for so long, you can't imagine life without it. And maybe the best thing for you this morning is just to let go of a stone. Like if you spread gossip about somebody, maybe you should just go to them and ask for their forgiveness, beg for their forgiveness, and make things right. If your heart is hard towards somebody in this room or outside this room, maybe you should just go do something for them. And maybe you should just, don't tell anybody that you're going to do it, just go to God with it. Maybe for you, if you've behaved badly towards someone, you could go to them just today, like today. Why wait and seek forgiveness from them? Because at the end of this story, the only ones standing there are Jesus and this woman and some stones. And don't miss this, that Jesus could pick the stone up. He had every right to. But he doesn't. He doesn't approve of her. He just accepts her. He doesn't condone her. He doesn't endorse what she's done. He doesn't overlook any of her choices. Instead, he says the most wonderful thing to her. Where are they? Where are those who have condemned you? Where are they? Jesus' point is really simple. There's no one who's spiritually superior to you. We're all in the same boat. We're all fighting against the same storms of life. We're all facing the same fate. And she probably with the meekest of voices, there's no one here, sir. And Jesus, with a smile on his face and with grace in his hands, he simply says, well, me neither. Me neither. Jesus doesn't stop there, though. As you keep reading the story, Jesus doesn't stop there because he has one more thing to say. And Jesus says these words that like cut to her heart because he knows as he's trying to bring her back to life, these are going to be words that just bring a lot. They fill her with pain because they reveal to her who she used to be, but project her into what she could be. And they're going to be words that are going to fill her with hope because they tell her that someone literally believes in her and will accept her for who she is, but not going to leave her there. Because these words are going to remain with her until she's dark, old, and gray, and she's going to pass them on to her grandkids. And these are the words of somebody who loves her. And they are these words: go, sin no more. And here's what I want you to think through. Did you see the order of the words from Jesus? He didn't say, go and sin no more, and then I won't condemn you. He says, I don't condemn you. Go and sin no more. Meaning this, that you don't have to put out a whole lot more effort to get your life cleaned up before you come to me. You don't have to try to make yourself worthy in God's eyes. You don't have to make yourself worthy in your boss's eyes, your family's eyes, even in your own eyes. You don't have to find yourself to be worthy before you're accepted. Jesus is saying literally, I've taken all of the condemnation for you. I've done everything for you, and I've taken it from you. You just need to trust in my words, trust in my works. I accept you. And then woman, you'll be able to find yourself to be able to get rid of all the stuff in your life that's holding you back, and you can leave it all behind, and then you'll change. That's the order, Jesus said. See, Jesus accepted this woman in John chapter 8. He forgives her of her sins, and his acceptance and forgiveness of her comes at a tremendous cost to him. Because in defending her, he's made more powerful enemies, because they're going to come after him with a bigger stick, if you know what I mean. Go and sin no more. Jesus' acceptance is free, and it's undeserved, it's unmerited, but it's also very, very demanding. It comes with a cost. For this woman to fully embrace her forgiveness and her acceptance, it's going to require her to enter into a new way of living. And that same grace that's going to liberate her from her past calls on her to walk free in her future. Which tells me this: if you get nothing else out of this entire series, here's what I want you to get. That when it comes to people, compassion is greater than condemnation. That compassion from us is greater than condemning the people around us. Like condemning people to death never gets us anywhere. Compassion and acceptance does what condemnation and self-superiority will never do. It will never change a human life. But just imagine what would happen in your life if you started to live like Jesus. Where you never attacked a person's worth, you never held them in contempt, you never picked up a stone. You know what? Then we would join in that life-saving business that Jesus wants us to be in. You have to go out. Some of you may not come back, but you have to go out. Even though it costs you all that you have to go out. Because there are people out there who are worth you saving, worth you changing whatever, worth you sacrificing, worth you encouraging. Whatever it will take, people are out there who need you to go to them. That's why Jesus says these words, that when you become a follower of Jesus, this is what he says: whoever wants to save their own life will lose it. But whoever loses their life for me, they will find it. Meaning this, it's pretty simple. That when it comes to other people, your perspective about other people is this: that winning is greater than losing. Winning them is greater than losing them. Saving them is greater than losing them. When it comes to other people, if I could change anything about you, that would be your perspective on people. That winning them at all costs is greater than losing them to the storms of life. But at the same time, Jesus says this: when it comes to you, when it comes to me, that losing is greater than winning. That whoever loses their life will actually win in the end. When you choose to give your life to Jesus, you win. Winning is greater than losing. Losing is greater than winning. People are worth my acceptance. I want to pray for you. God in heaven, I thank you for your word and the power that it gives to us each and every day to live our life. And Father, you've presented us with an incredible task of not picking up stones, carrying them around, or even tossing them at the people around us. God, you've given us this incredible task of just accepting people for who they are and loving them to the point of being saved. And God, would you find us as a church willing to go out to the last measure of need? God, would you find us as a people who follow you with our very lives, dedicated to saving people, bringing them to be introduced to your grace and your compassion and your mercy. Father, where their past is washed away and wiped away like writing in the sand. God, would you find us faithful today, knowing that people are worth our pursuit and our encouragement, our sacrifice, our holiness, God, even our acceptance. God, we can't thank you enough for Jesus. It's in his name we pray. Amen.